infantilism and libertarianism, or the concept of personal responsibility. Libertarians come up with this idea of a system of property. The benefits and the detriments of one's own actions are isolated to the individuals. If you decide that you're going to work hard, work smart, you get to reap the benefits, and no one else gets to steal the fruits of your labor. If you decide to do drugs, you would reap all the detriments, including starvation. The problem is what I call the infant mom dialectic, where you get people who like to cry, they like to whine, and then you get women who listen to them. And if you combine all of the losers in society, you combine all of the people who make bad decisions and who don't have a concept of personal responsibility, if you combine all these people together with the entire female population, or the majority, especially the unmarried women, especially the single unmarried women, if you combine all these together, you have well over the 50% threshold. Universal suffrage democracy gets thrown out the window, which, you know, libertarians will agree with that. How do we move from a society in which the bedrock fundamental principle is universal suffrage democracy? How do we move from that to libertarianism? Like in the practical space in which we exist. The practical space is most people waste their lives on pursuing sex, winning at video games, making YouTube videos, watching YouTube videos. If you're watching this video, you're probably not doing the most productive thing that you could theoretically be doing to gain power in society. And I kind of want to put things in perspective when we talk about revolutionary movements, because it would be a revolutionary movement if you wanted to change society from a democratic to a libertarian society. I feel that the libertarian movement, or people who are libertarians, are naive and they're not focused on the right things. And they don't understand history. They don't understand how to go from point A to point B. And I'm not even convinced that point B, which is libertarianism, is a viable thing at this point. And the reason why is because you realize that to change society, you have to work with what you have. And what you have is not a population full of libertarians, it's a population full of losers and women who are voting against you. And so how do you destroy democracy is the question. And destroying democracy is not done through this abstraction on some theoretical perfect system while ignoring the present condition. There are people in power. They are willing to manipulate women. They are willing to manipulate people who are sexual deviants, of people who are obsessed with video games. Like, it's very easy to manipulate these people. It's very easy to manipulate sports fans. And it's just so easy to manipulate these people. You cannot reason with these people. The idea, oh, we're just going to explain property rights and people are going to get on board. No, people are going to hear the emotional rhetoric of property rights mean people starve in the streets, or libertarianism means people starving in the streets, and you lose the discussion. It doesn't matter what your logic, your dialectic is, your rhetoric loses. You are a failure in the court of public opinion. So you have to figure out how do you gain power, and you gain power by domesticating people. Stefan Molyneux's not wrong. There's some video he has, the story of your enslavement, and the idea there is just a rehash of Mein Kampf, which says that civilization began when a certain group of people learned how to domesticate another group of people. And since that point, that's basically all society is. It's people domesticating other people, people using the labor and the energy of other people. Marxism tries to address this, and Marxism, or socialism, says that there should be no domestication of people, that people should own their own labor, and in that sense, Marxism has libertarian roots, and they're coming from the same place of we need fairness and we need justice, we need a system where there's not some class of people who are manipulating, domesticating the rest of the population for their own benefit. So in that sense, I see Marxism and libertarianism as very similar, even though the two sides, they're totally at loggerheads. I see them as very similar, coming from the same place and viewing the world in a very similar way. The difference historically is that libertarians have tended to be, again, ineffective and unwilling to deal with realities, and simply kind of theorizing and not doing much, not taking practical steps forward. Marxists traditionally have been effective. I think on some subconscious level, these people were narcissists who wanted power, and they saw this Marxism as a means to power in a particular place at a particular time. From that lens, libertarianism is a poor vehicle for power. Getting up in front of people and promising them equality is a great way to earn power. People love equality because it means the abnegation of responsibility. No one wants responsibility. Responsibility is scary, and people are infants. They're infantile. They don't want responsibility. So if you get up in front of people and say, no more responsibility, universal basic income for everyone, we're going to have Marxism, we're going to have socialism, no one starves, everyone's happy, everything's great. You get up there and you make all those promises, you hold the power. You hold the power because you're able to domesticate people with that message. If you go up in front of people and say personal responsibility, you will lose. You will lose. Now, people can say, no, that's not true because, look, white people vote for the Republicans, or the Republican Party won. But if we actually look at the practical, the meat and potatoes of the situation, the Republican Party is not banning women from the vote. Okay, the Republican Party is not even banning people from coming into the country. Immigrants lean Democrat, even from Europe. The Republican Party is not banning criminals from having kids. The Republican Party is not banning immigrants from having kids, right? So all of the social trends that are leading to the abnegation of responsibility, personal responsibility, are continuing. So you can say, oh, they won the election, so actually personal responsibility is a awesome talking point. People love personal responsibility. You know, that is such a narrow-minded analysis, and that the actual trends that are going on is that people are upset and scared about immigration, and they want someone to come and tell them everything's going to be taken care of, everything's going to be all right. They're upset and scared about ISIS. They want to hear that everything's going to be all right. They're upset and scared about losing their jobs, and they want to hear that everything's all right. So on those fronts, yes, the Republicans won the election, and they're actually in a better place than a lot of people predicted right now with the whole blue wave situation. But again, all the trends that have been leading away from libertarianism, away from personal responsibility, are continuing. Texas will go blue. Florida will go blue. Hispanics are not going to turn into a Republican demographic. And so necessarily, as whites become the minority, like, you're going to lose the presidency. That's just the fact of the matter. What Trump has been doing, there's been a lot of stuff that's been done, and none of it has reversed the trends. And so if you don't reverse trends, and you don't stop the trends, right, because it's not just stopping immigration, you would also have to start deporting people, and the net flow of people still is positive into the United States. It's not negative out of the United States. And so you're still on the same course. And perhaps he's delayed it, and that's great. Like, let's delay all that we can. Let's do everything that we can, because worse is not better. South Africans, white South Africans, hate apartheid in the majority. White South Africans, if you talk to the average white South African, they'll say apartheid was a bad idea. It was bad. We were sinful. We were bad. And you look at the farmer, you look at everything's going on there, and you say, well, how can you possibly say that apartheid was bad when now you're in the situation that you are? And some of them live in gated communities, and they're not really affected by the farming murders or whatever. And some of them, it just is proof that brainwashing works, or that morality kind of takes precedence over common sense sometimes, especially with white people. You tell them apartheid is bad, and they will just repeat it until they die, and no matter how much empiricism hits them in the face, denying their morality, they will continue with their moral code. So it's sad, but it's true, and that's the way America will go. You will have America be a minority white country, and people will still say, but it's bad to be racist, and so on and so forth. So, you know, libertarianism is not good rhetoric. And so what is good rhetoric? Well, if you're trying to fight egalitarianism, you're trying to fight the handouts, you're trying to fight all this abnegation of personal responsibility, what popular measures do you have? And there's not a lot of positive that you can offer people because, you know, you're not a fan of welfare. You're not a fan of handing out free money or whatever. You're not a fan of subsidizing homelessness and subsidizing bad behavior and drug addiction and all these terrible things. So what can you offer people? Well, if you can't offer a lot of positive, you have to start giving a lot of negative. You have to start fear-mongering. You have to start setting people against one another. You have to start undermining democracy. You have to start setting factions of society against one another. That's basically what you have to do. You have to be a rabble rouser, basically. And you have to paint the current power structure as illegitimate. And that is something that you can manipulate people into believing. It's not false, but you have to use manipulation because people don't listen to reasoned argumentation. It's not that you are pushing for falsehoods. It's not that you are saying things that are lies. It's that you can't make a propertarian argument to people and have them listen and gain power from that. You have to make an emotional argument. You can't say, well, the government's illegitimate because it doesn't follow, you know, the NAP. You have to say something like, this government is illegitimate because it's anti-white, or it's anti-male, or it's anti-American, or you have to make some kind of identity-based thing. You have to play identity politics. If you don't do that, there's no way to win. And once you've won, theoretically, could you have some kind of perfect libertarianism thing? Theoretically, but all of these forces are still going to exist. Like, women are still going to exist, theoretically, unless you replace them with, I don't know, sex robots or something, or breeding chambers, or I don't know. Women are still going to exist. Losers are still going to exist. And so in order to prevent these people from coming back into power or being given power by other forces, you do have to have some kind of identity politics where you say men are over here, women are over there. You have to have a kind of inversion of feminism, where I agree that like feminism identifies patriarchal aspects of our society, calls that unequal, and criticizes it. You have to do the opposite. You have to identify patriarchal aspects of society, you know, realize that that is unequal, and you have to reify it. You have to do the exact opposite. Standing there and saying, we're just going to be fair, we're just going to be equal, is not the way that, you know, Hegelian dialectics work. That's not really how games work in general. If you have one person who's pushing you and one person who's just trying to stand there in the same place, the pusher will always win. You have to push back with at least an equal and opposite force, and if you intend to win, you have to have a greater force. You can't just sit there yelling, stop pushing me. It's not going to work. So when we understand that, then libertarianism itself starts to dissolve, and we start to realize that the concept of personal responsibility, only a certain class of people can be held to that standard. It has to be people who are not constantly blaming all of their problems on racism. It has to be people who are not blaming all their problems on sexism. It has to be people who are not lazy. It has to be people who are not immature and infantile. It's a very small percentage of the population. Therefore, libertarian norms don't work for a society unless you have essentially a closed society in which you say, okay, only if you are a landowning white male over the age of 35 or something, only then can you vote. And you have to have that enshrined in the Constitution and everything, in the Declaration of Independence and all of that. You have to have it enshrined in religion as well, so women can't talk in church anymore. Sorry. You have to have a holistic picture to give people. That is an identitarian picture that says, look, you were born into this caste, basically, and that is your station in life. Because otherwise, if you just start out from the presumption of equality, then you are a person dealing with others rationally, and they are coming at you with vitriol, violence, and emotion, and you're never going to win that battle. I mean, the classic example, argument with a woman using logic and reason, she's using emotion, you're not going to win that argument. Okay? You basically, at the end of the day, the only way to win those kinds of arguments, you have to say, I'm the man, and I'm in charge, and we're not discussing this. Those are the ways, that's the way you win the argument, basically. And if you can't do that, you've already lost before it's even started. And so there's basically a global, and it's not just men and women, as I've said. There's a bunch of people who for one reason or another don't want personal responsibility. And so you have to deal with all these people, and you have to somehow contain their democratic urges, their urge to have a French Revolution to cut off the king's head. And, we can even look at the monarchy and say, well, shouldn't the monarchy have some kind of responsibility to the people? And then you go into private property, and when we talk about these things, you always have to step back and say, well, how does that sound to the majority of people? Because a libertarian will say, well, the monarch doesn't have a responsibility to the people because the people are his property. Again, when you get into this concept of people as property, it doesn't sound good. You can't sell that. And if you do really think that people can be property, if you are this like super libertarian monarchist or something, and I know there's different variants and some people hate monarchism and others are into it, but if that's your thinking, then if you think people are property, then obviously you're not going to address an object the same way you address a subject. Right? A subject is someone who can be dealt with logic and reason and so forth. An object, like an animal or an infant, is someone who can't be addressed with logic and reason. And you have to view that person as an obstacle rather than someone who can be treated fairly, with respect. And therefore, when you have a conversation about libertarianism or something, it has to be understood that this is a theoretical conversation between two people. It's not a public conversation. It's not something that you should be out in the open forum, promoting libertarianism. It doesn't sell as a message. If you are really a libertarian, then you'd have to say, well, there is a certain small demographic of people who are actually attracted to libertarianism, and that's basically white men. And so we have to use white nationalism as a vehicle to get to libertarianism. And then you look at the state of the white nationalist movement and you go, wow, there's a lot of work to do here, right? There has to be some kind of A to B to C plan, a process. It has to be, logical, and part of that logic is realizing the way that human psychology works is not logical. It would not be logical to walk up to a baby and start arguing with the baby about why it is illogical to cry. That is not a logical thing to do. That is not the smart thing to do. The smart thing with a baby is you have to understand that this baby is not capable of making, logical syllogisms. You have to deal with what you have. Is the baby hungry? Is it need to sleep? Is it, whatever. So you deal with the baby on the level of an infant. You don't treat it like an adult. And at the same time, you don't treat most adults like adults. You don't treat them as if they are these rational actors with free will or something, because that's not how they act. And they don't have positive life outcomes when you treat them like that. And they're not... that your society is not going to run well if you make this assumption that everyone can just take care of themselves, let alone take care of their kids or other people. It's not going to work. You have to impose laws on people. Otherwise, what happens is you get a state of chaos. People are starving in the streets, and then a demagogue comes along, like Lenin or someone, and they, or a French revolutionary comes and they cut off your head, Mr. Monarch. So you have to have some kind of protection against that. And that's basically what fascism is at the end of the day. It is you're taking inegalitarianism, you're realizing that the concept of personal responsibility is threatened by democracy, by populism, and then you wield populism in favor of personal responsibility. That's essentially what it is. It's the wielding of populism. If you do not wield populism, you lose. If you are not playing the populist game, you lose. Explicit libertarianism, talking to people about it, will lose every time. So if someone is talking about libertarianism, they're a snake oil salesman, there's someone who is, you know, too autistic to understand how people act socially in the real world, or they are trying to distract you from real issues. They are a gatekeeper. They're trying to prevent you from doing something effective. So I'm really tired of the libertarianism. I'm really tired of all the comments I get. The only people who are willing to, there's the people who agree with me, the people who won't argue. The only people who will argue with me are the libertarians. And I'm sick of it, because every single argument is, here's the theoretical nice thing, here is like the reason why you're mean, or here's like this perfect system that theoretically would work, or here's how things should be. And it's like, well, does that actually appeal to people? How do you get to that? How do you sell a product in such a way as to achieve that state of things where you have private property? How do you get from A to B? It's like, well, you just talk about it. Well, it's not a sellable product. It's not something that is ever going to have popular appeal. Power is popular appeal. If you have control of the masses, if they're listening to you, if they're buying into what you're saying, you hold the reins of power. You're not going to get that with a libertarian message. You need a populist message. You need an identitarian message. You need a fear-mongering message. You need something that appeals to people's emotions to get their attention, to get them on board with you, have that team spirit. You have to appeal to football fans, the kinds of people who are, well, it's the team that happens to be in the geographical location of the urban environment that I reside in, and therefore go, whatever the team is, I don't know. Go Falcons, Tigers, go Zebras. It's inane, it's infantile. That is what you're dealing with. You have to get on that level. If you're not capable of getting on that level, you're not capable of wielding power, because that's the name of the game. You have to appeal to these kinds of people if you want to get anywhere politically. And Trump was able to do that. He was able to have the third grade level, I appeal to the educated, I appeal to the uneducated. He is able to speak to stupid people, and that's why he is where he is. And if you want to be successful, you have to be able to speak to stupid people, and libertarianism is not going to get you there. So you keep making these libertarian arguments, and I keep telling you, you're not going to achieve anything with that. And I'm certainly not going to start promoting libertarianism or admit that you have anything right when you have no viable plan to get from point A to point B. I'm just thinking of Adam Kokesh talking to Stefan Molyneux and be like, well, if we just rationally apply our principle of non-aggression, then gradually this movement will grow over time and eventually will take over because everyone loves freedom. No, people don't love freedom. People like rules. That's why they play video games with rules, not video games with an open sandbox. Okay? Like, even Minecraft has rules. Like, reality has rules. People like rules. This concept of freedom is a talking point, and I don't even have time to go into the whole weirdness of the word freedom and the hypocrisy of it and everything that it implies. You know, it's basically, freedom means freedom from personal responsibility. That's what it means in America. And yeah, you have the Second Amendment and you have the First Amendment. And so there's a lot of different stuff that people find a way to weasel it into the concept of freedom. They're all disparate and opposing one another. But that's all for now. Thank you for listening.